Okay, good evening and thank you all for coming. So, the last talk in our consciousness studies series, we started in September and we covered quite a lot. So I would like to recap a bit the things that we've been talking about. Before we dive into today's session, scientific spirituality, which sounds like a weird pairing of words. So yeah, kind of with the things we've been talking about, maybe it gives sort of a better context to sort of embed this and think about it. So, we've had Deepak, who is the founder of this MQ Academy. He is into philosophy, especially Eastern wisdom traditions. And then we had Kasha, who's a bodywork practitioner. She does psychedelic assisted therapy facilitation, and she's a biologist. And then we have Simone, who came out of the corporate world and was full on HR and coaching, and today she's a practicing shaman. And then we had Diego, who from the ETH studying pharmacology, then traveled to Ramsala, and I think he stayed there for 13 years meditating. And yeah, he's one of the people that when they want to study monks and what happens to your brain if you meditate for many hours, Diego was one of the people they sometimes call up. And Laura, she studied with Deepak at the California Institute of Integrated Studies, and she is kind of into this sort of plant consciousness idea, sort of reevaluating how our relationship to plants. And yeah, myself with physics and complexity science, and my little passion, philosophy. So Deepak was telling us about these ancient wisdom traditions in India, from the Vedas, the Upanishads, and these three Aurobindo, who kind of set out kind of a nice framework that then also got applied in the West. And one of his ideas is this involution, so in the Hindu concept of this cosmic consciousness, how would that sort of materialize and start to form a universe separate from this divine presence, and this is this idea of involution. And this kind of came into the West. John Gebser, he's a Swiss, was a Swiss philosopher, and Ken Wilber, maybe some of you know, he started this integrated or transpersonal psychotherapy. And mindfulness was also one session. So we, in the West now, mindfulness is everywhere. We know what this is, but actually this is kind of a more modern trend, and these ideas started to be talked about in the Vedas and the Upanishads. So kind of very detailed description of sort of these techniques, way back, and also obviously in Buddhism, how to sort of, train your mind and kind of become sort of a master in consciousness. And the Yoga Sutra, which again is one of these founding texts, which we today know a little part of what we think of as yoga is just one part of this huge sort of spiritual tradition. And how this moved to the West, to the US, with some Indian gurus going to the US, and some specific techniques. One thing is obviously your breath, vipassana, or you can focus on one specific object and just be sort of mindful of that, or this loving kindness meditation. So kind of all these techniques, and they're rooted kind of in these old traditions in the East. Kasha talked about psychedelic assisted therapy, and she focuses on the importance of the embodiment, the bodily sensation. So we usually think psychedelics is something that happens in it only happens in consciousness, and it transports you to different planes of reality. Yeah, sure, but there's also kind of an important component, which is then also kind of in the therapeutic context, which is about this bodily sensation during your psychedelic experience. And she also likes to talk about kind of these forgotten women in sort of psychedelic culture, and these counterculture and transformative festivals like Burning Man or whatever. And Simone, so she talked about some rituals and sort of practices in shamanism. And just to recap, shamanism is basically the oldest spiritual tradition. Depending on who you ask, it's 10,000 or 50,000 years ago, where kind of shamans started to alter their consciousness either through trance or psychedelic substances and said, hey, there's this spirit world next to our physical world, and it's real, and you can travel between the two, and actually you can gain information for like healing. So this is kind of like the template that shamanism gave us. And Laura talked about this vegetal turn that's happening. So in the humanities, it's like at one point people were thinking like maybe we should sort of include animals into our sphere of compassion and empathy, so like treat them better. And now it's like maybe plants. So what's our relationship to plants? And plants have memory. They can learn. They have like interactions. They can communicate. So an idea of like, should we give plants like personhood? What does that mean? Which makes life kind of difficult. I mean, if you think of the tradition of Christmas trees, that sounds like really bad in this context. And then we had Diego. So his journey.
Quick question. She never extended it to consider that absolutely everything is conscious. Everything.
Sorry?
Everything is conscious. There was never a discussion on. Yeah, everything. Everything.
Storm.
Yeah, how we treat our clothes, how we treat everything. Everything is living.
So I'm just recapping.
Oh,
sorry, I'm just recapping.
If she did.
Aha,
There was the discussion on
Good.
it.
I'm just checking.
I mean, basically what you're saying is idealism. Everything is consciousness, and we should kind of respect that. But that comes later. And yeah, how Diego kind of from Zurich, from the ETH, then ended up like meditating for whatever 25,000 hours, and kind of showing the research on how this actually changes your brain states. And it was kind of interesting that he said, like, I think sort of with neuroimaging methods, after like 8 weeks of, I think 1 hour a day, you can already see like changes in 3 parts of the brain, which all relate to sort of emotional regulation. And like how this induces states of like joyfulness and happiness, and moves us away from kind of like these negative mind wandering states that our brain sort of goes into by default. And yeah, so how do you cultivate these positive states? Meditation is definitely one point. And I started with like talking about how mathematics is the blueprint for reality. So science is basically, you take a chunk of reality, you encode it as mathematical equations, you do the math according to the formal system, and you then make a prediction, you translate it back. And this is kind of like the template of what science is basically doing in physics. So math as the machine code of reality, which is kind of weird because you can do math in a dark room with your eyes closed in your mind, and kind of the relationship to the outer world. This was what Eugene Wigner was like wondering about, the theoretical physicist who was like the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. And then we also talked about kind of this, complexity science. So physics deals a lot, so first of all it deals with the non-living and the non-conscious, but then it kind of doesn't do such a good job when things start to get complex in terms of interaction. So if you like want to model a swarm of birds, it's really hard if you're trying to solve like 50 or 100 differential equations. But what it turns out to be, it's like easy if you do it from an interaction point of view. If you do it algorithmically, so you're basically simulating the evolution of the system, and you're not actually trying to sort of solve equations. So this is where this complexity science sort of came in, that it's like what looks like complexity is actually often the rule of very simple rules of interaction. And this is like, as an example, I mentioned a couple of times Stephen Wolfram. So 2002, he was like a new kind of science. Hey, so he's a physicist. He was like super clever and still is. So like even his papers that he wrote is like I think a 17-year-old are still like referenced today in cosmology and I think in quantum physics. And he was like, hey, physics went wrong the day they started to do mathematics like 300 years ago with Newton. And we should, it's a computational thing. We should think about it in terms of computation. Everyone ignored him. 2020, he brought out another book, the project to find the fundamental theory of reality or something, and now he does hypergraphs updating in kind of abstract space, and he claims that, look, the structures we have here, they look very much like general relativity or quantum behavior, and now slowly physicists are like, yeah, maybe we should listen to Stephen. And he's also kind of talking about how consciousness fits into this. And yeah, so kind of we have the impression that science understands a lot, and it does. It's amazing. We have all the technology, but there's so many like existential foundational problems, like what is time? Is space-time emergent? What's happening at all this crazy weird thing happening at the quantum level we talked about many times. So there's a lot of stuff which makes absolutely no sense from like a rational common sense perspective. And this is something which goes into philosophy more. And yeah, as I mentioned, consciousness was like ignored in academia till the beginning of the 90s, where they were like, yeah, there's like whatever, this is not very relevant, which seems weird because that's like the only thing we kind of exist in as beings. And then in the philosophy part, it was like this tension between physicists and philosophers, where in the beginning, the pioneers of quantum physics, they were very open to like engaging with these sort of fundamental weirdness of reality, like wave-particle duality, measurement problem, superpositions, entanglement later on. But then kind of the next generation came along and they were like, hey, shut up and calculate, just forget about like this philosophical like arguments and just do the math, do the equations, and they work, and you can understand stuff and you can build amazing technology. And that's where it's kind of the whole philosophy of science sort of became very marginalized in physics, which I think is kind of, as a physicist, I think the first thing you should be told is like a crash course in the philosophy of science. But that didn't happen. So a lot of physicists are like philosophically or metaphysically kind of ignorant, and they think philosophers are like stupid and annoying because philosophy is kind of just this squabbling about ideas. So that's why, very importantly, this idea of physicalism, like the metaphysical underlying, the underpinning thing. So at one point you have to do metaphysics, because where physics stops, metaphysics begins. And that's if you start to talk about what things are, what's the nature of things, which you cannot prove or disprove. So at one point you have to engage with philosophy. And this just happened pretty late for physicists, and that's why kind of the reigning metaphysical idea, physicalism, or it used to be called materialism, that's that everything is physical, that's the only thing that there is. If you look at the interactions of the small parts, you can understand everything. Consciousness, life, at one point we understand it. And only slowly now are we kind of like realizing that this is a metaphysical belief. There's nowhere in science, there's no equation telling you to adopt this. So there's many other metaphysical belief systems you can have, which are just as unprovable or provable as physicalism, but they will give you a very different way of how you would like look at the world. So unfortunately, this physicalism kind of went under the radar, and only now slowly rational, like scientifically thinking people realize, actually that's just like an add-on, a philosophical add-on, that's not part of science itself. So you're allowed to criticize that without sort of being branded like ignorant or irrational or anti-science. And the problem with that is it kind of tells you that this is all just random and purposeless and kind of this cosmic nihilism. And just grow up and deal with it. You're not special. There's like no purpose to anything. You die, that's it. And just grow up and deal with it. Which, of course, you can have this point of view, but maybe you should know that this is like one you choose, and there's others which say different things, and they're just as valid from like a knowledge perspective as physicalism. And that's why the hard problem where David Chalmers said, actually, how can non-mental stuff start to have mental properties? In 1994, today we're still discussing that. So in the philosophy of mind, they're like two totally diverging ideas. So you have the physicalists on the one side, and then you have like the panpsychists and the idealists on the other side who say, hey, it's all consciousness. And they're like, no, it's all physical matter. And they find each other's perspectives like ridiculous, and yeah, they really don't get on very well. And what's happened with the kind of the psychedelic renaissance, that we've realized, actually these banned substances have mental health effects and they have benefits, that philosophers were like, hey, maybe we should talk about this. So you have the philosophy of psychedelics as a new thing, where like this one philosopher of psychedelics says, if you're a philosopher of mind and you don't take psychedelics, it's like if you are a pianist and don't have a piano. This is like the thing you should be doing and like engaging with. And slowly, yeah, because it's like destigmatized, you're allowed to say, I've had a psychedelic experience and I want to think about this like as a philosopher, without people thinking that you're like some crazy person or just whatever, some junkie. And yeah, we talked a bit about artificial consciousness. So what does that even mean? And is consciousness only mediated by organic structures, or could this happen in silicon? And how will we even know, like, again, the problem of other minds, like how do I know you have like the thing going on that I have? Maybe I'm just hallucinating you, or this is a simulation, or solipsism, maybe I'm the only thing that exists and everything else is just like happening in my mind. So yeah, we don't know. But that was like sort of setting up the journey a bit to where we're going. And looking at the history of psychedelics, it's like terrible in the West, like this huge blind spot. So until recently, I did not know that in the beginning, when Hinduism was starting to become a thing, this spiritual tradition, that they had soma, this psychedelic drink. I did not know that Plato was taking a psychedelic substance. Like no one ever talked about that in any philosophy class ever, which is like, yeah, because of this kind of hostility towards psychedelics, because they're drugs and they're bad. So kind of we have all this whole history, which, yeah, slowly now we are being taught about this. And especially like Plato, was he like telling us about his experiences that he was having on like psychedelic trips? Like the allegory of the cave, or this Platonic realm of absolute forms, sounds very much like things that people who smoke DMT would like talk about. So maybe we should just like talk about that when we do Western philosophy. And also in shamanism, where like the one, so he's the historian Eliade, Mircea Eliade, he wrote a book about shamanism, where he was kind of showing that there's like these universal themes happening everywhere across the globe in these shaman cultures, if it's whatever, in the tundra in Siberia, or if it's in the rainforest or in Africa. And he kind of showed that there was like this universal sort of technique and like culture happening at different times across the globe, which, he did it as a historian and not as an anthropologist, and they kind of got annoyed that he did that and ignored his book, but it still became kind of the standard on shamanism. And he was saying, as soon as shamans take mind-altering substances, they're decadent, because the true shaman does this with trance, and so again, like this hostility towards psychedelic experiences induced by substances, like really weird. Like why would he, I don't know, like what's the issue there? This is like from the very beginning. And if you study shamanism as he did, you kind of should think that, or realize that that's like the main point there. It doesn't really matter how you do it, it's that you do it. And then we have kind of this talk on idealism last week. So this is kind of what's happening at the moment. There's this renaissance in idealism, which is weird, because idealism says consciousness is everything. So everything you see is derived from this field of consciousness, and as we talked about it last week, you can't really understand it rationally, because it just makes no sense. It's like non-duality, or kind of, these are trans-rational ideas, but you can experience them. And that's kind of what these shamans and mystics and meditators and psychonauts tell us about, that these are, you can experience cosmic consciousness, you can experience oneness, what it means, non-duality to like merge with all of existence. These are experienceable states, reproducible, but you can't rationally kind of understand it. So that's kind of the problem with idealism, that you can't really, from a rational perspective, grasp it, and that's why it's kind of like had maybe a hard time sort of to sort of come back into the collective psyche, because in Germany we had a big wave of idealism with Kant and Hegel, Fichte, and all these guys, and Schelling, and then it was like, yeah, but that's kind of stupid because it's like totally doesn't work with like what we're seeing in reality. But now with the philosophy of mind, philosophy of psychedelics, and with all these issues we're having with fundamental physics, we still don't know like how gravity and quantum mechanics go together. Maybe space-time is emergent. So people are now rethinking kind of these metaphysical foundations, and idealism is having a comeback. So, scientific spirituality. I would like claim, we'll get into like what these words could mean, but kind of the state of our world today, I think it's fair to claim that this is like a mirror of how we like are spiritually, or like how we as individuals function, and kind of how healthy we are and our society is. And in one way we live in the best of all worlds, but somehow we live in the worst of all worlds. And like, what is the root of the problem? And yeah, having a glimpse of scientific spirituality. So, yes.
Sorry, I understand what science is, but I have not a very good definition of spirituality. Are you able to?
I'll get into that later.
Okay.
It doesn't matter for the moment.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Because yeah, it's all a bit vague at one point. But so technology, like literally, like we have crazy technology, rovers on Mars. We have we have supercomputers in our pockets. If you would have shown one of these devices to any engineer or computer scientist 30, 40 years ago, they would be like, no way, this is like, we have 5 nanometer like technology, which then has to be 3D, because otherwise you have quantum tunneling effects because it's so small. I mean, this is like, we have crazy technology. We're like these mad geniuses when it comes to technology. We have the internet, this information thing. We have free access to everything. I mean, you can go on the internet and you have the whole, everything, knowledge. Well, I mean, Wikipedia does like a pretty good job. I mean, you get pretty far.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I mean,
What
like,
free? What means free? You know, like there's a price to pay.
But also the ancient civilizations were extremely advanced. We have no idea of.
This is just like sort of the
Yes.
nice sort of positive stepping into like,
Good.
it gets
Because we
dark,
did a
it
few
turns dark pretty
experiments.
soon. And like AI, I mean, until like not too long ago, like no one knew what ChatGPT 2 point whatever was until 3.0 or 3.5 came. So this happened like super quick, and it got super crazy super quickly. And this gene editing, this CRISPR technology we have, and now chemistry Nobel Prize 2024, we can design proteins and we know how they fold, and this is crazy. This is a crazy complex problem, and now we've solved that. So we're mad geniuses in terms of technology. So life is great, isn't it? Yeah.
It is alien technology. It's because we discovered Megatron in Transformers.
But where did that come from? Like, no one saw that coming. Like, why can we harness like so much? Like, why can we engineer at such an amazing level? Like unlock, or like quantum computing, we can literally compute with spins of subatomic particles. I mean, come on, that's crazy. I mean,
Yeah, but then in the olden days, people would have said they would have connected to the Akash records. They wouldn't have needed ChatGPT. They just would have. So there are other
again,
methods.
that's
You're
like
right.
the shaman sort of the orthodox knowledge generation thing. So we're in the West now. So this is
in the
like
West, okay.
the Western point of view where we're going in and going to criticize this. So,
Oh, good.
So trust me, it'll get dark pretty soon.
Good.
So Keynes was an influential economist, and he was kind of his economic ideas were implemented after the Second World War, and were kind of like, people say that the reason why kind of things got better and we had the golden age of capitalism in the 50s and 60s. And in 1930, he wrote an essay where he was like, from the 16th century, with the cumulative crescendo after the 18th, the great age of science and technical inventions began, which since the beginning of the 19th century has been in full flood. We shall do more things for ourselves than is usual with the rich today, only too glad to have small duties and tasks and routines. 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour week, that's what it's going to look like, 1930, because of all this amazing technology and the automatization. Life's going to be better, right? So, wow, he was super wrong because, yeah, Edward O. Wilson is the founder of sociobiology, and he said, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Yuval Harari, the historian, in his bestseller, Sapiens. So, we are self-made gods with only the laws of physics to keep us company. We are accountable to no one. We are consequentially wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and on the surrounding ecosystem, seeking little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction. Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want?
Sounds like the Greek gods, yeah.
But he also
Multiverse.
said a lot of very bad stuff, like on that we should not have our self-will.
There's a lot of conspiracy theory in Harari,
no,
like a
he actually, no.
But can we just focus on
Yeah.
because we could like talk forever and everyone could like every 5 minutes pitch in and like say, but this is like that, or I think this. I don't want to be disrespectful, but this will take hours, or we just can give up. I mean, I appreciate like input, but if it's like constantly like, yeah, but this is that and this is that, then it's really hard to like have a talk. I don't know if you can appreciate that without like wanting to silence you or like be disrespectful. Thank you so much. Tim Jackson, economist, it's a story about us, people being persuaded to spend money we don't have on things we don't need to create impressions that won't last on people we don't care about. So let's talk about this ecocide that we're all kind of collectively involved in. Richard Tarnas, a historian, he wrote the book The Passion of the Western Mind, where he's chronicling like the whole intellectual voyage we've been on since the Greeks. And in the epilogue, in 1991, he writes, the critical contamination of the planet's water, air and soil, the manifold harmful effects on animal and plant life, the extinction of innumerable species, the deforestation of the globe, the erosion of topsoil, the depletion of groundwater, the vast accumulation of toxic waste, the apparent exacerbation of the greenhouse effect, the breakdown of the ozone layer in the atmosphere, the radical disruption of the entire planetary ecosystem, all this emerged as direly serious problems with increasing force and complexity. And note that he says the apparent exacerbation of the greenhouse effect, like, yeah, today we know like how much worse it is. And this was 91, so let's add the Great Pacific and Atlantic garbage patches, these huge jars of trash just floating around, accumulating in our oceans. And there's like, I think there's 7 in total, like smaller ones, but these are like huge. And then the loss of biodiversity is like super scary because there's something in complexity theory called tipping points. So complex systems are very resilient and you can really push them a long way and they will be okay. But once you push them over the tipping point, the whole thing just changes, like it undergoes a phase transition and kind of the next equilibrium it finds may be something which is totally not what you want to live in. So kind of this, especially with like the web of life where this is all interconnected, like at one point if you hit the wrong species and make them go extinct, this has quickly very catastrophic effects. And e-waste, microplastics, PFAS, these forever chemicals, which we apparently all have. Like in Basel, you shouldn't eat the fish you get out of the river like more than once a month because it's full of PFAS. And chronic disease, antimicrobial resistance, drop in sperm count, and this whole climate destabilization. I mean, the heightened natural catastrophe activity, Swiss Re, in kind of their words, because they are the people who are insuring this and paying for this, and they kind of have the numbers on it and know how bad it is and how it's increasing. So we kind of live in the worst of all worlds. And to quote Albert Hoffmann, the LSD guy, in the Encyclopedia of Psychoactive Plants from Christian Rach, the 1,000-page book on all these psychoactive plants, end of the 90s, he's like, it's unnecessary to list in detail where things are going wrong in our world. But what is meant on the spiritual level is materialism, egoism, loneliness, and the absence of a religious foundation for life. On the material level, it refers to the environmental destruction due to technologization or over-industrialization, the looming depletion of natural reserves, and the accumulation of immense wealth by a few, while a large portion of the population is increasingly impoverished. Again, this is 1998. Things haven't got better. This sounds terrible. So it gets even worse, because apparently our social fabric is deteriorating. We have ideological trench wars. Everything is black and white, left and right. You have team blue, team red. No one, like, from one team can't talk to the other team. Everything is one-dimensional, black and white. There's no nuance anymore. It's like literally like two spheres have split off and they can't communicate anymore. We live in a post-truth world. If you lie often enough, this lie becomes truth, and people live in it, and it becomes real in a sense. So that's kind of a more recent sort of phenomenon, which leads to the loss of consensus reality. Like, literally, you can say this is down and this is up, and you can have people who will then say, yeah, that's true, and that's how we're going to live. And that's why it's kind of hard that, yeah, if there's no basis for reality, how we interact, no wonder our social fabric is deteriorating. And so many people have been radicalized online, from like older generations to young generations. And conspiracy theories, because they often give you a sense of simplicity, and they also give you a sense of being important. So a good predictor for someone being a conspiracy theorist is narcissism. And then what causes narcissism? Often it's trauma. So like, oh my God, this is so bad. It's like terrible. And yeah, this kind of willful ignorance that people are like, I don't mind, like, I don't care. I have my beliefs, I have my ideology, and I'm willing to just like ignore reality. And populism. So let's define populism as simple solutions to complex problems, and you give people a scapegoat. So that's very alluring. That's kind of like, yeah, that's something which will flourish during these times. And like the rise of theocratic authoritarianism in the West. Interesting, let's see how that goes. And this absurd inequality. So Keynes, as I said, after the Second World War, kind of his economic system kind of, yeah, helped things improve. Then in 1947, people met in Geneva at Mont Bellerin, and that's how they called the society, Friedrich von Hayek, and they were like, Keynes is wrong. He has it the wrong way round. And they came up with the neoliberal political philosophy, which says, actually, what you should do is like, first of all, you have to deregulate, because the market is like super clever. It regulates itself, and everything you try and regulate is wrong. And this goes back to Adam Smith, who had this idea of the invisible hand, that like, you just let it happen and the thing self-organizes and it's clever. Yes, we do have self-organization, but not kind of in this context. And kind of in this sort of Ayn Randian sort of philosophy that if everyone's selfish, then it's like really good for everyone. And neoliberalism really kicked off in the University of Chicago, like in the 60s and 70s, where there's like experiments in Chile. And then Reagan and Thatcher kind of introduced this to the world. And this has been a fantastically successful political philosophy, leading to 8 people owning as much wealth as 3 billion or 4 billion people. So what, I mean, you don't have to be like a complexity like scientist to realize that that's not a very sustainable network. That's not gonna, like, this is like bad for systemic risk. This is bad for like, this is like not a clever way of doing stuff. So yeah, in such an environment, you have a lot of cruelty and suffering. People are angry and want to inflict violence on others because that's like a good thing to do. So if I would like characterize the state of our collective psyche on the world, it's like selfish, depressed, unhappy, disenchanted, numb, unfulfilled, dishonest, meaningless, alienated, lonely, purposeless, suffering, superficial, indifferent, cynical, fearful, malevolent, distracted, greedy, hopeless, frightened, and stressed. So we seem to be suffering from a spiritual crisis, a crisis of meaning. I think that's kind of fair enough to say that something is going wrong, and it's not on the material level. We have technology, we have automatization, we could live in a better world. It's a spiritual crisis we are having, an existential crisis of meaning. And as we know from these meditation techniques from individual people, kind of, I think what most people would agree is that maybe our collective psyche should be more, or we as individuals should be more empathetic, joyful, happy, enchanted, flourishing, fulfilled, honest, meaningful, connected, have community, have purpose, be thriving, sincere, optimistic, compassionate, courageous, mindful, hopeful, brave, relaxed, benevolent. So how do we get there? I think the root of all of this, it sounds stupid and maybe weird, it's bad philosophy. Because if you think about it, the metaphysical system you adopt will shape how you see the world, how you interact with the world, and apparently our collective unintelligence that we're showing is kind of based on our deepest beliefs about reality and consciousness. So that's why that's where we currently are. We have this metaphysical constriction that's like, I mean, this isn't exclusive, but this, I think, like captures a lot of where people are. Of course, there's more nuance, but on the one hand, you have science and rational people, and they're like, I don't believe in God, that's kind of silly. And yeah, the universe is purposeless and like, yeah, disenchanted, and life has no meaning, and I die, and that was it, and kind of a very depressed outlook on life. It doesn't like, it's not very empowering. It's like, kind of I find it a sad metaphysical sort of picture of like living in this state. And on the other side, you have kind of these monotheistic religions, which as kind of an institutionalized sort of power structure are dogmatic. So it's our gods are right, yours are wrong. And it's static because it was written down whenever in some book, never changed, will never change. So kind of that sounds weird. And very simplistic because like every problem you have, it's like, God did it. Yeah, and that's fine. So I think that's also kind of a disenchanted thing. And I mean,
my God did it.
Exactly. Well, yours doesn't exist. And I mean, if you're a religious person and you are a joyful and passionate, compassionate person, I think that's great. And I think your religion is great. But if your religion teaches you to be divisive, to like discriminate against certain people or hate other people, then I think your religion sucks. It's like terrible. So, sorry. I mean, it's like, come on. So we seem to have like the worst of both worlds, from like the rational and the more irrational. So scientific spirituality, what happens if we take the best of both worlds? So spirituality, I don't know what that means, but but I think it's about, or in the widest term, it's about engaging with your own consciousness and your own existence. As simple as that. You are kind of like, you're willing to like look in the mirror, or like also metaphorically, you're willing to like engage with yourself and like really look at yourself and like your issues and like who you are as a person, what you want to do, and like, and cultivate sort of things or techniques that allow you to become this transformed person. So you go from this state of like being unhappy, angry, dissatisfied, and you realize that's all external. And I can cultivate a state of happiness in myself, which is totally detached from anything going on in the outside world. This is possible. This is what these meditator masters show us, that the suffering that's inflicted in the outer world does not translate into suffering in the mind. This is something you can change. So anything, whatever you need to do do that, find out what it is. Maybe you need to take a lot of psychedelics, or take walks in nature, or do holotropic breath work, or chant, or drum, or whatever. I mean, let's all kind of find out what it is that allows us to be more joyful people and help kind of fuel the collective psyche with more positive sort of energies. And kind of this holistic understanding of ourselves. So we always kind of, especially in the West, it's like this individualism, which is kind of something which is distinct from how people in the East, they're more collectively thinking. And this is probably a reason why, why maybe things like science worked so well in the West, because some of this focus on your own thing and your individual thing in isolation, which is fine, but we shouldn't forget there is this, it's all networks. Everything is connected in some way. And even at this kind of, I don't know, quantum level with entanglement, it's literally somehow this whole universe seems to be a lot more connected than we experience. And that's something which we should also be mindful of. And kind of this open-minded and non-dogmatic exploration. So this is a criticism for a lot of scientifically thinking people and a lot of religious people, because it's you have your dogmatic idea, your ideology, and you don't change it. And there's a lot of scientists who, that's why I think Max Planck said, yeah, when a new theory comes, it's not that people see the light and adopt the new theory. You have to wait for the old physicists to die, and then the young people take over, because no one changes their ideology. We should try to do more of that. And whatever you adopt as a metaphysical belief system, but just kind of a rejection of physicalism, or just kind of know its limitations, that it's this is not the final word in what it means to exist as a conscious being in this reality. It's just one take, and we should be aware that there's different shades of how we can engage in metaphysics. And yeah, kind of this dynamic self-correcting paradigm which we have from science. This is what science does. Even if you have dogmatic people, at one point science corrects itself if things are wrong, because that's what science is. It's a continuous dynamic thing, and maybe our spiritual tradition should also be self-correcting and dynamic. And yeah, let's try and be more rational, but also try and be more experiential, and kind of go deeper into this sort of multiverse of experience which is there, which you can access through changing your mode of cognition. Again, holotropic breath work, or ice baths, or jogging, or psychedelics, whatever. And the kind of the more sort of or kind of symbolic modes of cognition, where I kind of mentioned last week, this is kind of what shamanism was about, that kind of everything in the universe is speaking to you. So if the deer runs past, or whatever, the eagle flies by, everything has a meaning, and you try and derive the meaning and understand it. And this is what Carl Gustav Jung kind of then formalized in a way where he came up with or he realized that a lot of people were kind of having these experiences of random things occurring, but they seem to be meaningful, and he called this synchronicity, because somehow there seemed to be this deeper meaning of things happening if you look. And that's where he also came up with a kind of, or sort of formalized this idea of archetypes, this sort of these templates of universal meaning. And he was actually super big into astrology, and his friends were don't tell anyone, because no one's going to take you seriously anymore. But for him was that kind of makes sense, because everything is kind of in this kind of symbolic way of being cognitive. Everything has a message. It's up to you to decode it. And kind of, even if there is no purpose outside in life, you can still foster and like find your own purpose and define it. And this is kind of like, again, somehow the crisis we're in, that we're lacking a purpose. Like, what is it that we want to do or want to go also as a collective? And I think this is something we really need to figure out as like a global society. And let's listen to the shamans and the mystics and the meditators and the psychonauts, who are the masters of consciousness and have been talking to us for ever about like this other kind of non-physical reality. And let's also listen to the scientists who've been telling us a lot about this physical reality and like bring together like the best of both worlds. So, what would that mean? The idea is to enchant the universe again. Jeremy Narby is an anthropologist, and he wrote the book, The Cosmic Serpent. And in a talk, he not too long ago said, science itself is evolving, moving away from a mechanical understanding of nature. The idea of a kind of intelligence active throughout nature is gaining support within the scientific community, affirming the view long held by indigenous people and shamans. Now the entire edifice of life from top to bottom seems shot through with intelligence, suggesting that the evolutionary process itself may be intelligent and that evolution may be guided by an intelligence within as opposed to an intelligence above or blind chance. So the blind chance is science saying, oh no, it's just random, and this is my God did it. So Narby is saying, hey, if we kind of look into it, it's like amazing, like let's be sort of have this wow effect of seeing this intelligence. And now kind of in the context of idealism, can you like take the next step and try to like see this intelligence like acting throughout the universe, like this idea of this teleology of like the will to complexity, yeah?
Just a quick question, because I think the Western world also has the concept of Mother Nature, which sounds like the parts described above.
Yeah.
But you think it's not truly believed, or?
I mean, how we kind of behave doesn't really seem as we care too much about Mother Nature, unfortunately. So, yeah, what will we choose? Where are we going? We seem to be at a crossroads. So, I don't know, maybe an idea that can kind of recalibrate our metaphysical or recontextualize our metaphysical beliefs can maybe help us go more to the left instead of the right. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, so